So hi, I'm Walt. I work with Dr. Salvucci. The research I'm working on is called canonical behavior patterns, and I'll talk about what that is in later slides. So I've done research in applying this in two different areas, in web browsing and in driving. So I kind of cut most of the web browsing stuff out just for time, but the motivating example I'm going to have here is with web browsing, and I'll talk about driving a little bit later on. So, okay, so suppose you want to look up, you want to find out what the roster of Drexel's basketball team is. So one thing you could do is you could go to Drexel's homepage, and you could click on athletics, which I think is like over here. And then you go to the athletic department, and then you click on basketball, which is like over here. And then from basketball, you can get to the rosters/coaches, which is over here. And then finally, that's top. Oh. Right, and then finally you end up at the roster here. So that's like that's like one way to get there. Another way, and probably a simpler way, is you could go to Google, and then on Google you type Drexel basketball roster, and you get a list of things, and look, there it is right on the top. And if you click on that, you get the roster that way. So this all, so given the fact that you have like lots and lots of different paths that people have taken through a website to get to your information, how could you go about like automatically finding that, like, say, those are two different ways that people have gone about doing it? And it seems maybe simple like this, but if it was something really complicated like that, you know, it's not something you can very easily do by hand. So, like I said, so what I'm calling is like, what the topic of my research is called canonical behavior patterns, or canonical behavioral protocols. And what a protocol is in the world of like HCI research is just some sequence of events that when people do some sort of an experiment, you sort of capture everything that they do in the course of it as a time series. And then that's your protocol. And you basically generally have one for each subject or for each task that the subject does. So for something like you're just typing on a computer, it would be maybe the keys that are pressed, or like how, like the timing in between key presses. You know, moving a mouse around, it's like the XY positions, and maybe speed, or when you click on it. But for driving, there can be all sorts of things: the steering angle, the speed, how much you're pushing the pedals down, the angle. You know, also what the driver's looking at, and things like that. So those are the sorts of protocols that we're interested in trying to make sense out of. But the problem is that when you very quickly can gather almost too much information, and so it's very difficult to just analyze it all by hand. So you end up doing some sort of aggregation, or you have some preconceived notions of what you think the people are going to be doing, and if they're doing something that's unusual, sort of like Lou was saying, it might be hard because we're not using those sorts of techniques, and it could be very difficult to find sort of interesting patterns that you're not looking for. So what I'm trying to do is automatically find what I call canonical behaviors, and those are just some very small subset of protocols which are the most representative protocols in the set. And we also want it to be really small, because we just want to have like a very small set of representative things. We can't say that they're all representative. So typically there might be a whole lot of them. We want to look for maybe like 4 or 5 most representative items. So how do we go about doing that? So the way that this works is for each of pairs of things that we want to, in our big set, we come up with some sort of similarity measure between the behaviors. And that ends up being the really difficult part of this. But once we have them, then we want to find the things that are minimally similar to each other. So they're very different from each other, but they want them to be maximally similar to everything else. So that's our definition of what really good representative is. So they're really similar to everything else, so they're representative of them, but there's not very many of them. They're very different from each other. So it turns out that this is intractable. This is an NP-complete problem. But there's a really good approximation algorithm for it. I don't know, do you guys know what approximation algorithms are? Anyone? So just because a problem's NP-complete doesn't mean that you're stuck. So it's actually, in lots of cases, possible to come up with an algorithm that's not going to give you the best result, but it's going to give you something that's guaranteed to be no worse than, say, twice as bad as the optimal solution. And often in NP-complete problems, it's just sort of like the worst case, which is really that bad. And often you can come up with various heuristic ways of coming up with better solutions in certain cases. But for good approximation algorithms are guaranteed to be no worse than like some percentage off from the best answer, no matter what data you give them. And that's what I'm using for this. So this is kind of how it works. So given we have all these pairs of similarities, we make a graph. And the edge weights are how similar the pairs of items are to each other. So if there's a really long line like this, that means that the vertices are really far apart from each other. So that's really good. So we want them to be far apart from each other in our set of this canonical set in the dashed lines. But we want them to be pretty close to each other. And so even though this optimization, as I said, is NP-complete, you can set it up as a quadratic program and make a matrix and feed it into MATLAB and get a result which is pretty close to the optimal solution. And that's how I go about doing this. So this is, I guess, kind of repeating what I had here. But the cool thing is that you don't really need any prior model of what you're expecting the data to look like. As long as you have a good similarity measure, you're going to get some sort of reasonable results out of it. And you don't have to predict like lots of clustering things, like how many things you think are going to be in the set. So this is, I guess, kind of similar to clustering also, but in clustering, you're taking the entire data set and trying to divide it up into different groups. Here, I'm just trying to find a very small number of representative items. And then the other thing is I can cluster them if I want because I have these similarity scores. So whatever one of the, if you have something that's non-canonical, whatever one happens to be most similar to of the canonical set, you can do some rudimentary clustering that way. So the data I've been working with is from a lane change experiment that Dr. Sallucci did a number of years ago. And what this was is that we had a number of subjects that went into a driving simulator, and they had to navigate down this road. I say I'm only using straight roads, but there also was another experiment they did at the same time where they were on a curvy road. And while they were driving along, there were 2 lanes going in one direction, 2 lanes going in the other direction. They mostly stayed to the right. Every time they came up to a computer-controlled car, they had to go to the left lane, pass the car, and then come back to the right lane. And the computer-controlled cars were going at different speeds, and sometimes they would pass the other computer-controlled cars. And so they did this for maybe half an hour, each one of the subjects. So they all changed lanes some number of times. And while they were doing this, data was being collected at 13 times a second for like 20 different parameters, like how fast they were going, the position of the steering wheel, the position of the brake, their position on the road, their position in the lane, their heading, all sorts of things like that. They also had eye trackers on, so they were able to record where on the screen. So they weren't really driving down the road, they were sitting in a simulator and the road was projected on a screen in front of them. And so we can tell from this eye tracker what part of the screen they were looking at, and we can, from that, tell if they're looking at the road or another car or the other lanes, things like that. And so this behavioral protocol that I'm interested in is this time series of all the data for each one of the lane changes. And I want to find from this big corpus of like over 200 lane changes for all the subjects, what are the most representative samples of it. This is kind of a picture of what it looked like. This is the curved road. I don't have a picture of what the straight road looked like, but it was similar to this except it was straight. But they also had these like kind of walls along the side. There was this projected rear view mirror up here. This plus, they didn't see the plus, but this plus sign represents like what the eye tracker showed that they were looking at. And this shows what the subjects look like. So you can see that they're sitting behind the wheel of this car in this kind of sawed-off Nissan, and this is the road being projected in front of them. And they're wearing this eye tracker thing on a kind of a weird helmet, and they kind of drove along and did the experiment. Here's some of the results that I got. For this, I looked at the paths that the cars took as they were making the lane changes, either left to right or right to left. So this is their position as they're going down the road. This is the right lane, and this is the left lane. And the big fat ones are the ones that, where I picked as one of the canonical ones. So this, and there are only 3 there? I guess there's only 3.
3 or 4. There's a blue one.
Yeah, blue, green, purple, yeah, there. And all the other ones are colored based on whatever one is the most similar canonical one to that. And the similarity measure here involved, it was sort of complicated, but it involved both looking along, divided up the paths into a number of points, and it looked both as a combination of how far apart the points were between comparing 2 lane changes, as well as the lateral velocity of the cars. And then using that, I used something called the Hausdorff distance to come up with a similarity score between them. And so what I didn't use was whether they were making left to right or right to left lane changes. So it was pretty cool that it was able to get 2 and 2, and it mostly, with the exception of one outlier, this blue one here, was able to cluster them by left, right, right, left. This is another thing that I'm looking at now, where I'm looking just at where they're looking on the screen from the eye tracker data, and the similarity measure that I used here was just the edit distance. So for each of these, all I really cared about was whether they were looking at the left lane, the right lane, or the rear view mirror. And I divided each of them up into like 200 different segments of either left, right, mirror, and I computed the edit distance between them. And that was the similarity score that I used. And and I'm just drawing it as a step graph so you can see what part of the road or the mirror they were looking at. And so we're kind of excited from this that we got things that look more or less like what you would expect somebody to be doing when they're driving. So for instance, here's the person before they're about to start changing lanes. They're changing lanes from the left lane to the right lane. That's what the LR means here. And they're in the left lane, they're kind of looking at the left lane, they check the mirror twice, then they begin the lane change, and they're strictly looking at the right lane then as when they start making the change. That was a case where there wasn't another car in front of them. In this one, there was a car in front of them. So here, they're looking at the right lane because they were looking at a car that was kind of in their way. And the car in the mirror. And then over here is when the car changed from the right lane to the left lane. And then once that car got out of the way, they were focused on the right lane, just like the other one. So anyway, I don't know what I'm doing on time here. So yeah, I think I'm just about done. So like what I'm looking at now, like mostly what I've been doing is actually not with that canonical set algorithm with the graph that I showed, but coming up with good similarity measures to compare data. This is work that came from computer vision, and there's lots of really good standard ways to compare, say, 2 images and see how similar they are. But I'm finding that I have to invent a lot of these things for behavioral stuff because they don't exist. So that's really what most of my research has been on, is coming up with similarity measures. And some other things there. So I think that's probably it. Okay.